Okay, in this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and continue on this point tutorials that we did last week. In this tutorial, I want to show you how to create points using surveying methods. So we might need to create a point at a bearing and distance or an azimuth based on a reference line or the side shot. So it's important for us to know how to do this in AutoCAD, even though most of the time this stuff is done in the field. So first of all, just go to your points menu and open up that create points toolbar. And we're going to create a point. And I have my dynamic input on so that I can create a point by northing and easting. So we're going to type 500, tab 500, enter. Point description, I'm going to call it start, and elevation 100. So now I have a new point number created at this northing and easting. Alright, now I have not escaped or entered out of this create point command. It needs to be open for these next tools that I'm going to show you to work. You have to be in this create point command. The first one I'm going to show you is on this toolbar here, and it's the angle distance. This command specifies a point location at an angle and distance from a known point and direction. We'll click on it. Now it wants to know the ending point, so it's gonna be based on a reference line. You can see here the last two entered points define the reference line. So I don't have two entered points, so it's asking me what the second point should be for my reference line. And so if I type point P, that'll say a point number. Or I can just specify a location. And I'm not sure what .n means. Let's find out. Northing. So you could enter northing of 550. Easting 500. Let's keep it the same. So it's basically straight up and down. That's the bearing I'm going to be using. Okay, so if you had 2 points in there, you could have referred to a second point number. Now we're going to specify the angle. So from that reference line, what angle? And as you can see on the screen, it tells me as I move around, I'm going to turn dynamic input off so we're not confused. As I move around the screen, what angle I'm currently at. So you could do that this way, or you can actually type in the angle. So let's type in 112.0116. And now it wants to know the distance. And as you can see, as I move my cursor, it changes the distance. So I can type in 100, enter. And a point description, we're going to say, let's just type dot. I don't want a point description. Point elevation, leave it blank too. So now it's asking for a northing. If you hit escape, it goes back to the initial command of creating a manual point. So now we're back to creating manual point where you could select. I could turn dynamic input on, dynamic input, and type that northing and easting in. Let's go to the next command. This next command is a bearing and distance. So this specifies a point location at a bearing and distance from a known point. Let's select that command. So it's starting on the last point created, and it wants to know the quadrant because we're using bearings and distances. So let's select quadrant 3 for the southwest. The bearing, and it's asking for input, current direction input, unit. You need to put degree in degrees, minutes, and decimal seconds. So you can type in, let's do 13 D for degrees, 30 minutes, 30.5 seconds. You can see that as the command line. Hit enter. And it is now going in that quadrant, third quadrant, at that angle and distance from the south to the west, 13 degrees, 30 minutes, and 30.5 seconds. Now you select the distance, 100, enter a point description blank, elevation blank, and now I have a new point. I wish I could zoom in and out from here, but it's not really letting me do that. So let's escape, and I don't know why it's not letting me. Go to the view panel. Actually, let's go here. Out. Zoom out. Okay. One more time. Zoom out. Okay, so let's create another point. Alright. Now, next, specify the next location. Let's use the next command, azimuth and distance. From a known point, the last entered point is used, and you must specify from a start point and north meridian, we're going to specify an azimuth and distance to a specified point. So from the north meridian, we're going to go in azimuth, and as you can see on the screen, the azimuth is changing as I move my cursor. So let's choose an azimuth of 165 and a distance of 125. Description, elevation, it's created another new point. Hit escape to escape out of that particular command, but we're still in the create points command. The next one is the deflection distance. You don't see this one as often, but I will show it to you. So now we're on point 9. It's using the point before it as its reference line, and it wants to know the deflection angle and distance. And as you can see how I just did that, I selected it on screen instead of creating a new one. Okay, now let's escape out of that command. We're still in our create point command. Now we can create a point here by entering a northing and easting. So let's create it by northing 600, easting 600. Now it's created a new point up here, point 11. Escape out of that. And we can create a point by a grid northing and grid easting. But keep in mind the grid settings are required in the drawing. So in the drawing settings, you have to select that it is in the grid coordinate system. And the same thing here in latitude and longitude. You have to have your zone and coordinate system settings set in the drawing setting in order to use that command. And then these commands can be used in other commands that I'm not going to be using right now, but I want to show you this one. It's a side shot. So this specifies a point location, angle, and distance from a known point and direction. So we're going to use the last two entered points as a reference line, so 10 and 11. And now it wants to know the angle off of that for a side shot. You can change that if you notice on your command line. You can change that to counterclockwise. You can change it to a bearing or deflection or an azimuth. So, so you can choose the angle here and then the distance. Description, elevation. Now, your setup doesn't change. You still are occupying point number 11, backsighting point number 10, and it wants to know the next angle. So you could do a side shot over here. Specify the distance, description, elevation. Again, your setup is still the same because we're in side shot mode. Okay, escape out of that. And then the next one is a station offset. So we'll talk about that more when we get to alignment. And then there's some for profiling. So I just wanted to show you those and how to create them so that when you actually have survey data, if it was from a field book and you didn't have your data collection software to create the points for you in the data collector, then you could do it manually here.